Hello and welcome to the channel, my friends. It's Thunderbob here, and tonight we are going to talk about a franchise that is very close to my heart. Resident Evil. This is a series that has basically been there from my earliest gaming days. A series that has grown with me over the years, reinventing itself with each new release and with each new generation. Of all of the game series I have enjoyed over the decades, Resident Evil has the most impressive release cadence, while also maintaining a very high level of quality, with just a few missteps over the years. I've been playing these games at release for nearly 30 years now, but I've come to realize that while I've replayed a few of the games many times, like Resident Evil 4, there are a few that I've not played since that original release date many years ago, and there are at least 2 mainline games that I never actually completed. So my plan is to replay every mainline release in the series, including all of the numbered titles and the remakes. And I'm going to throw in Code Veronica and Revelations 1 and 2, even though it's debatable if those are mainline games. I'm going to play through the games in release order, and then put together a review and retrospective for each game individually. I intend to contrast my memories and feelings playing these games originally, years and decades ago, against how the games hold up today. I'm going to play through these games on the PC where available, and for the older titles with graphical mods to try to play these in the best possible light today. When I'm done with the entire series, I want to do a final video with my overall thoughts on the series and a ranking of all of the games. And a warning here, there will be some spoilers, but let's go ahead and get started. And tonight we're going to be talking about Resident Evil Revelations. I had not previously played either of the 2 Revelation games, so this is totally new to me. This was originally a 3DS exclusive, and I did not get that system until a couple of years after release. I was curious about it at the time. Could they really translate the Resident Evil experience to a handheld system and retain the atmosphere, horror, and action of the series? It was later ported to console and PC, but by that point I was kind of over the series. I didn't really love Resident Evil 5, and I really disliked what I played of Resident Evil 6, and I just didn't care to try out this game. So now I'm playing this for the first time on PC, and I'm pleasantly surprised. This is a pretty awesome little Resident Evil game. It's not perfect, but for a small handheld spin-off project, this game has a lot going for it. First off, the game looks pretty amazing, taking into consideration this was originally a 3DS game. I'm playing the PC version, and of course the resolution is higher and some of the textures have been replaced. But for ostensibly being a 12-year-old handheld game, it looks quite good. The game has a really strong presentation here as well. Like before each chapter, there's a previously on intro, like it was a TV show. It reminds me of Alan Wake series, which did a similar thing with the credits and intro between each chapter. It makes more sense there because that game was going for like an episodic Twin Peaks kind of vibe, but it's still interesting that they tried it here. I guess maybe they figured you might forget what happened previously between sessions, as this was a portable game. So let's talk about the structure of the game. This game has 2 modes, campaign and a raid. First we're going to talk about the campaign mode. The main playable character is Jill Valentine. She's the only character with upgradable gear, though you do play as many other characters, telling the story from the perspective of Chris Redfield and a few other BSAA agents. The game takes place shortly after the events of Resident Evil 4. The game is told in a very non-linear fashion, with each chapter jumping to different points of the story and from different perspectives. The game introduces a floating island named Terra Grigia in the Mediterranean, which was attacked by a bioterrorist organization named Veltro, using biological organic weapons. Lansdale, the leader of the Federal Bioterrorism Commission, or the FBC, initially tries to control the outbreak, but later uses an advanced solar power system to fry the entire island. Jill Valentine and a new character, Parker Luciani, along with O'Brien, the head of the BSAA, investigates the beach a year after the disaster, searching for bioweapons. The game introduces a new scanning mechanic. You can scan any of the creatures, and you get some points towards a healing item. After scanning and clearing a few of these blob monsters on the beach, you find out that Chris and a new partner named Jessica have gone missing and are tracked to a derelict ship called the Queen Zenobia. Jill and Parker head to the ship and explore and run into a new variety of zombie called oozes that are kind of like waterlogged, melting zombies. Jill separates to explore the ship and finds a tied-up Chris, And you can tell it's Chris because look at those muscles. Jill searches the ship for the key and kills a ton of these oozes and finds a scantily clad woman who gets killed and also has the key you're looking for. With the key in hand, Jill and Parker break in and find out it's a trap and are knocked unconscious.
I found a survivor.
Then cut to Chris and Jessica, who find out Veltro are still active in the mountains somewhere. They run into some dogs, and then they get a call that they need to go and try to rescue Jill and Parker on the Queen Zenobia. The game then cuts back to Jill, who awakens in a section of the boat that's eerily similar to the Spencer Mansion, and a ton of ooze zombies, and Jill without a gun. She quickly reunites with Parker, and they manage to rearm. The pair then run into an FBC agent named Raymond Vester. This then cuts back to Parker and Jessica escaping the Terra Grigia incident just before the disaster, and introduces a wounded Raymond with this weird scrunched face for the entire scene. They fight through endless waves of hunters before they make it to the helicopter just before the city is destroyed. This then cuts back to Jill and Parker meeting with Raymond Vesper, who really doesn't give you any indication of what's going on, why he's there, and he just kind of pieces out and leaves. From here I was able to get the shotgun, and also I located an item box, and you learn how you can use this item box to upgrade weapons and store your weapons. You can carry 3 weapons at any time. You then travel through a beautiful dining room and into the grand hall, and then the promenade. You find your first boss there, named the Skaghead, who is the comms officer, and as you come across him, you hear his voice from a distance. It's super creepy. This boss fight is really insane, and it raised my expectations for the game. He charges you out of the room, and it's just this monstrous creature, and he chases you while the other oozes spawn constantly. They're explosive barrels, and you can use them to blow up, and there's lots of ways to kind of avoid him in the area. It's a bit frustrating if he catches you, but the fight is just really, really intense. That boss then drops a key that lets you access the communications room, where you find Raymond, and you all watch a video that Chris and company are also watching at the same time. And it's Veltro laying out their plans to use a new bioweapon on the world's oceans. Raymond is a bit more forthcoming this time, and he gives you a key to turn on the power and access the casino. And he explains that he's there on behalf of the FBC and is looking for his partner, Rachel. Jill travels back towards the first area they explored on the ship, looking for a key to an elevator, and find Rachel, who has now become this monstrous zombie creature that talks similarly to the Skaghead, the comms officer. You end up chasing her through the deck, and every time you put enough shots into her, she disappears until you reunite with Parker, and you're both able to take her down. This gives you the key to travel down the elevator and ends the chapter. And this cuts to another scene where you play as Keith and his partner, a couple of BSAA agents, and kind of a bunch of idiots. Their code names, and I'm not joking, are Grinder and Jackass. And you play as Keith for about 3 minutes without any combat. You watch a video of an invisible enemy killing some other soldiers, and then the game cuts back to Jill and Parker, who travel down into the depths of the ship. This area has flooded, and you have new aquatic enemies to deal with. There's a steam puzzle here to gain access to different areas and to find a key to start the engines. And once you start the engines, the compartment starts to flood, and again, the chapter ends. This then cuts back to Keith and his buddy being idiots and running into invisible hunters, and then finding the secret location of the ship, which they pass on to O'Brien. And we find out that Chris is en route and has just arrived at the ship with Jessica, who for some reason has on only half of a wetsuit. You retrace your steps, following Jill in a rather abbreviated fashion, fighting 2 Skagheads in the casino, but with the arsenal Chris brought, it's a much easier fight. Chris and Jessica rush into the room where Jill was trapped, but find it empty and not flooded. The game then cuts back to Jill, saving herself and getting the power started. Then they show a quick cut scene, and it turns out that Chris is on the wrong damn ship. He's on the sister ship, the Queen Samaria. Jill continues and runs into a new enemy, the Wall Blister, that can one-shot you if it grabs you. Jill and Parker make their way up to the observation deck to turn on an antenna to allow communication, and end up fighting this weird boss that looks like a giant sea barnacle. It takes an incredible amount of shots to take it down, and the pair finally make contact with O'Brien, who just found out that a solar weapon has been reactivated. Jill and Parker then rush to the bridge to use a UAV before the solar weapon can attack the boat. The pair run into Rachel again, who upon death gives you a weapon upgrade. You run into a huge hunter ambush, and you finally find the UAV, only to find out you then need to reach a control room to control the UAV. You get a 5-minute countdown to reach the control room, and along the way is just an incredible number of hunters and oozes, and also another fight involving both Rachel and Skaghead at the same time. This is one of the hardest gauntlets in any Resident Evil game I've played to date. And if you die, the timer also inexplicably goes from 5 minutes down to 2 minutes. After more attempts than I want to admit, I finally was able to finish this gauntlet. The UAV is launched and partially saves the ship, but the wave that the solar weapon causes still capsizes the ship and it starts to sink and take on water. So next up is a lengthy swimming section where Jill is trying to reach safety. Then Jill and Parker run into what they believe is Veltro, but it's really Raymond disguised for some unexplained reason. Just then, at the same time, Chris and Jessica arrive, and Jessica shoots Raymond without explanation. Everybody swaps partners for some reason, and Chris and Jill go exploring. They swim some more and run into another boss, this kind of lobster-like creature with armor that actually ends up showing up a few times throughout the game. And then they find a lab. There's always a lab in these games, isn't there? And this lab appears to be creating the T-Abyss virus that's causing all the mutations on the ship. The game then cuts back to Keith, and they go back into the base again and start hacking, fighting off lots of hunters and dogs, and they find some data, and it appears that Veltro may not exist and that the FBC and Lonsdale may have been responsible for everything from the beginning. Then someone drops a bomb on the pair. I hope they make it out. Back to Jill and Chris, who manage to neutralize the virus, and Lonsdale appears on a screen and sends a bunch of BOWs to stop them. Meanwhile, Parker and Jessica go to the bridge, and it turns out Jessica is the mole and shoots Parker and then sets the self-destruct on the boat. Chris and Jill race to escape and find a wounded Parker. They make their way to the deck, but Parker falls back into the belly of the ship. The ship is attacked by some huge BOW, and they have to fight it before they can escape by helicopter. And then in the air, there's a separate fight, a turret fight, where you're fighting this giant BOW from the air. When you finally destroy this BOW, you're told there is a third ship that you need to go and explore to end this game. Jill and Chris scuba dive down to this sunken ship and go through a lengthy underwater section before reaching a dry section of the ship. There they find the leader of Veltro is still alive somehow a year later. He has taken some of the T-Abyss and becomes the final boss of the game. And this guy's quite difficult. With an annoying teleport move, he creates duplicates of himself, and when he finally goes down, his recording helps you bring down Lonsdale. And it seems that everyone gets a happy ending. It's almost like a Field of Dreams ending where it kind of gives you like text on the screen and little vignettes of what everyone's doing. Parker survives, Grinder and Jackass make it out. And in an after-credit scene, we find out that Reynolds was working with Jessica all along, and he gave her a sample of T-Abyss. So that's the campaign mode. Let's jump to the other mode, the raid mode, which is basically the game's mercenary mode. But it's honestly so much more than that. I've only put a few hours into it, but it seems to have so much content. It's similar to Mercenaries mode, but instead of small arenas, they've broken up the entire single-player campaign into combat levels. They've stripped out the puzzles, the scanning mechanic, and the story, and you just run from start to finish killing enemies and finding loot. Between levels, you can buy weapons and upgrades, you unlock new characters, and you level up. I found if you try to play a level several levels above your current character level, it's really difficult. So you need to keep progressing to access the harder levels and the better rewards. You can play this mode cooperatively with other players if you can find anyone actually playing. I wasn't very successful on the PC, but maybe on the other systems you might have more luck. I do plan to spend more time on this mode, but what I've played so far, it seems like it really extends the replayability of this game immensely. So let's talk about the gameplay. The controls here are really progressive, even for this period of the game series. You know, this game came out between Resident Evil 5 and 6, which was really the action phase of the series. But this game has some elements that even those games had never attempted. There's no longer a run button. Instead, after a moment, your character picks up speed, though even your top speed is relatively slow and is not as fast as some of the previous games. You can also move and shoot at the same time, something unheard of in this series, but it works here because of that more limited movement speed. You can also switch between weapons with the press of the directional pad, something introduced in 5. There's a dodge mechanic, though it feels a bit unreliable to me. There's also a quick press button to throw grenades or use your healing items. The controls here feel much more modern, but there's something about it that harkens back to the older games in the series. You know, the limited ammo, the slower pace, the way the levels are structured, help it feel more like an old school survival horror game rather than RE5 and 6, even though it has these modern controls. The game has a pretty good arsenal, and it has a unique upgrade system that has you installing weapon mods that can be removed or changed at any item box. Only Jill has access to this system during the campaign, as she's the primary playable character. The game also introduces swimming. It's not too painful, as Jill apparently is an Olympic athlete who can hold her breath for 5 minutes, but I think most of these sections last just a bit too long for my taste. There's a new scanning mechanic. It feels a bit like Metroid Prime, where you scan enemies and the environment and objects in the world, though it's a bit less well used here. I was expecting some kind of log or repository for the information, but this game has nothing like that. This would be a great way to give you some information on the creatures you're fighting or story elements, but very rarely will a character comment on the scanned object. That's about all you get. You do get healing items when you scan enough, though it's worthwhile bonus. The only thing that gets a bit tedious is there are hidden items throughout the environment, but you can only find them once scanned. It makes searching for ammo feel a bit slow. I would prefer if these items were just visible all the time, but using the scanner made them easier to find. You can also only carry a small amount of ammo initially, and I found myself always leaving ammo behind, which felt weird for the Resident Evil series. Now, the enemies you run into are mostly different varieties of these ooze zombies, and I really liked this type of zombie. It felt really unique and appropriate to the kind of ocean-based setting. The bosses were all pretty scary, but tended to be a bit too spongy for my liking. It did make the fights very intense, but some of them dragged on a bit too long without any real mechanical changes. This game is more difficult than I was expecting, and, you know, I was only playing on normal difficulty. I'm really curious how hard the insane difficulty is. I usually had enough ammo, but they send just huge numbers of enemies at you toward the end of the game, and I wonder how much harder this would be playing on an actual 3DS. The game has a decent number of puzzles. There are a ton of electrical puzzles to unlock doors, where you move these pegs to try to light up this little electrical panel. There's also areas where you need to use the right key item in the right location, opening steam valves in the right order, that sort of thing. It's not as complex as the original trilogy, but it feels like it's trying to emulate that era. The story is told in a pretty cinematic manner, with a summarization of the previous chapter, like this was an episodic TV show. It feels a bit like 24, where they're trying to tell this epic story in real time across multiple perspectives, but it doesn't always work for me. There are so many twists and turns in this story, and I'm still not completely sure I got every point right. I felt like the constant perspective changes actually took me out of the game at times. Why make me play as some minor BSAA agent for literally 3 minutes? It did help me better understand the BSAA, and it was cool to see what Jill and Chris were up to between games, but I wonder if these other agents will ever be referenced again. I would really love for Grinder and Jackass to just randomly show up in the next mainline game without any explanation. The setting is also pretty unique for the series, being set on a cruise ship. The Queen Zenobia is pretty large and harkens back to the earlier games in the series that took place in one large environment rather than globe-trotting across the world. Exploring a single location, finding new passageways and shortcuts, and becoming familiar with that setting is really one of my favorite aspects of the series. I really wish the game would have used Terra Grigia more. It feels like a game set during the attack could be pretty epic, but there's just a few short sections at that location. So, final thoughts here, people. Overall, I was pleasantly surprised with the game. I went in with pretty low expectations, but really enjoyed this one. It's not perfect, but it really scratched that itch for a more classic Resident Evil experience after finishing 5 and those last few painful chapters. Many of the mechanics have changed, but this feels closer to the original trilogy than the last few games I've played. The campaign was great, though I would have preferred a bit more coherent story, told from fewer perspectives. Jill section was fun, but some of the others just felt a bit tacked on. The scanning is great in theory, but ends up being a bit tedious without much payoff. And the addition of raid mode adds a ton of replay value and is really well implemented here. Overall, I can recommend this. If you stayed away because you thought this was a portable, watered-down spinoff, I think you should check this out, and you might be surprised like I was. So I'm going to end it there. I do want to thank you for watching. I appreciate everyone who has subscribed, drop me a comment on this series. I'm going to continue on. My next game is Resident Evil 6, which is the longest game in the series. It may take me a couple of weeks to get this one out, but it will get out eventually. So thanks again, and have a good night, everybody.